I've said to a lot of people, you don't have stewardship unless you have intimacy with that landscape. And that intimacy comes when you've ridden it and you know a place where the cows go in the fall, and you've got to go check Canyon Creek because there's going to be a few in there. Or that you know it because you know where the needle and thread grasses come out, and you want to be sure that you have your cool season grasses as part of your biodiversity on your plant side. That's what we should be promoting, is that kind of intimacy with a particular piece of the landscape, and that can't happen if we're bickering and fighting, or if we're wearing people out and they're leaving a landscape. That's the benefit that I think we've had historically of families being in one place. The downside to that, quite honestly, is families being in one place get into a routine. And, you know, it worked, and it worked pretty well, so why change it? If you change it, it might not work. That's all true, but you've got to be out there on that edge looking at things that might make you more productive, things that might make you more profitable, and things that keep that system in a sense that it's building itself and not tearing itself down. Riparian areas make up a very small percentage of our total land mass out in the West. The West is arid, it's irrigable, some of it, but riparian areas, for a lot of people, what we find, and this is a hard thing, a lot of people don't know what it means. You know, we picked out a big Latin word and flung that thing around like a frisbee, and there's a whole lot of people don't know Latin, and so they aren't sure. You know, I've had guys say, "Oh, that's a riparian area. You're talking about the creek." That's it. And what we're talking about are these vegetation differences, very rich in diversity, very rich in structure, often very, very important economically because of the amount of forage that they produce, important to water quality, important to our irrigation, all of those things. That's what we're talking about when we say riparian areas. Unfortunately, the immediate rush to judgment on those kind of areas was, well, if the problem is partially related to livestock, then we just eliminate the livestock. Well, that's a mutually exclusive solution. And on the land scale that we're talking about here, it's also impossible. So we have to start looking at things that enhance that particular habitat type that we're looking at, that don't damage another habitat type, and that blend the two together. And so we've worked real hard at that. I mean, you could almost call this a riparian project. We've got about 40 miles of streams, we have wetland habitats, and in between that we have big, steep hills with no water. And the challenge in finding ways to manage in that setting hasn't been simple, but by the same token, because we didn't already say, oh, it's all gone, it's over, the world has come to an end, and instead said, how do we make it better? And I think that's really a key, Fred. I think you've got to say, here's where we are. Now, how do we make it better? Not here's where we are and here's whose fault it was that we got there. That's the question. Now, how do you manage them? Lots of fence. That's a lot of capital input. That's a lot of maintenance. It may or may not work in some settings. Up here, we've got places that, you know, you're not going to drill a post hole in 10 days, you know, so you've got to start looking at alternatives. And the one that made sense to me was herding, and to that degree, we don't herd cattle. I think it's a real misnomer. People get spooked off because when they hear the word herding, they think we're out there like we're herding sheep. You know, they're all in this little bunch and they bed them at night. Well, that isn't what we're talking about. What we're talking about is having a highly skilled, attentive individual, Travis Clyde, who is with those animals and is able to make decisions based on things that he's taught me. He can tell you every day what time those cows are going to go to water. He can tell you what time they get up, scratch with their hind foot. You know, he knows which cow likes which area of the pasture. That's herding. That's just knowledge of those animals and that pasture and being able to put them where he needs them. And he is totally responsible for that. One thing that he's done is started to identify animals that like it up there. And so we'll go through and start selecting replacement heifers, and Travis will be one who says, she climbs to the top of every mountain. Well, that's a daughter we may want to keep, because usually she's coming back with a whopping big calf anyway. and he'll look and say, she's a bottom feeder, you know, this is a meadow-loving son of a bitch, you know, and so those characteristics and that animal behavior, you can start to fashion animals that do things that you need done. It's also controlling time, and I think that really is the essence of what we do. We're in a pasture maximum maybe 30 days. We're in some 5 to 6. We've gone on the forest from a 200 head season-long permit to running 800 to 1,000 head, and they're in pastures now 6 to 8 days where they would have been in there for 100 days. You're going to have some influence on the plant community, and you're going to have some negative influence, but you're going to have a whole lot of positive. And so you start to look at that distribution, and then you start to look at what the animals do. You know, 20 head out there in a big old section pasture pretty much are going to be wherever they want.
Probably the neatest thing you see is 850 cows scattered out evenly across it in the morning. There's only water at the bottom of it. And in the mornings they're scattered out clear to the top, going over the top. And they're doing that on their own.
The first thing I would say about the economics, and I'm going to be real upfront about it because I think sometimes people aren't, your animals are going to have to adapt. Okay? Don't think that when you go to herding that you're going to maintain 650-pound calves. You're not. You're now in a numbers game as opposed to a bragging for the highest weight game. But our weights have come up consistently. Our weights this year, we just ran them this morning. Our steers were about 30 pounds heavier than they were a year ago. Our neighbors' weights are down. Our heifers' weights are about 30 pounds heavier. Our neighbors' weights are down. Our yearling weights are higher. And I think we're just turning the curve right now to where those animals understand our system.
They're figuring out that that's where the feed is. And we got the same bunch of cows pretty much every year. So they know where the feed is, and they're learning every year where the best feed is. There's water there, and they're figuring it out.
One thing you'll find out, though, is all of a sudden you have a whole lot more forage than you thought you did. And you've got a whole lot more days of use than you thought you did. And we've sure found that. So there's one balance. When it comes right down to the herder or the rider, I can't think of a practice that pays itself back more. Sick calves are found and doctored. Animals that would depart our possession either in the back of a pickup truck or otherwise don't do that. The knowledge that people have that that person is there and caring for those animals, and he could be over that hill or behind that tree, is very important. But it's the attentiveness to those animals. And the other place you really get paid back is when we start sorting these cattle this fall, and Travis can just rattle off to me, she had a lousy calf last year, she had a crummy calf this year, she spent most of her summer in a place I didn't want her. That's a pretty easy decision to make, and I get rid of a money-losing cow, and I can replace her with something that's going to be better. Those are benefits. Those are things, a lot of them are things nobody ever puts a pencil to, and but they add up. The rider will pay for the rider, and probably a lot more.